In 2018, investigators announced that after more than 40 years, the notorious serial killer and rapist known as the Golden State Killer had finally been caught. Joseph James DeAngelo was revealed to be the man behind the multiple horrific crime sprees that had terrified communities in California in the 1970s and 1980s. Investigators uploaded the DNA profile of the Golden State Killer to the personal genomics website GEDmatch, resulting in a positive identification. The story was one of massive public interest, not only because of the potential for solving other cold cases with the help of DNA testing websites, but because after so many years, many believed the case would never be solved. Sadly, not all cases are wrapped up so neatly. In fact, there have been multiple serial killers in US history who have never had to answer for their crimes. There are usually a variety of reasons for these cases going unsolved, from insufficient evidence to poor investigation, or simply the inability of law enforcement and forensic science to respond to these types of crimes, owing to the period in which they took place. Whatever the reason, perhaps the only thing more horrific than the crimes of these killers is the thought that they got away with them. Today, we want to take a look at some of these cases of unidentified serial killers, specifically cases in the United States. While there is hope that some of these killers may soon be identified, for now, they have managed to get away with their crimes, and the cases remain a mystery. Before we get to our list, don't forget to subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest videos. With that out of the way, here is our list of 10 serial killers who got away with it. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders were a series of attacks that took place in the winter and spring of 1946, wounding 3 people and killing 5. The attacks all followed a similar pattern, with the killer targeting couples after dark and either shooting them in the head or beating them with the butt of a gun. The crime sent the city of Texarkana into a panic, as residents began refusing to go out after dark and stores were selling out of guns, ammunition, locks, and other protective products. At the same time, police started doing nightly patrols of the streets, focusing on areas like the city's Lover's Lane, where 2 of the attacks had taken place. Though a man named Will Swinney eventually emerged as a prime suspect, investigators were split on whether the few pieces of circumstantial evidence were enough to secure a conviction. When Swinney's wife Peggy refused to testify against him, recanting earlier statements she had made about the crimes to police, they decided against charging Swinney. Though he was a career criminal and spent much of his life in prison, the Texarkana Moonlight Murders officially remain unsolved. Will Swinney died in a Dallas nursing home in 1994, at the age of 77. The Freeway Phantom raped and killed 6 young black girls between the ages of 10 and 18 in 1971 and 1972. The victims were all from the Washington, D.C. area and are believed to be the first such serial killings to take place there. The case was widely publicized in the media, with perhaps the most famous detail being the note left by the killer in one of the victims' pockets, 18-year-old Brenda Denise Woodward. After the FBI created a task force of over 100 detectives and federal agents to investigate the case, they received hundreds of tips from the public and chased down many more leads. The most notable of these leads related to the Green Vega gang, 2 of whose members had been convicted in a kidnapping and rape case that had taken place around the time the 6 girls were murdered. Though some investigators still believe a member of the gang to be the Freeway Phantom, many others do not. And sadly, the case has become extremely difficult to investigate, as many of the witnesses and original investigators have either died or have long since retired. Many of the original files and evidence in the case have also been lost. However, the case is still open, as well as a reward of $150,000 for information leading to the solving of the case. The Axman of New Orleans was responsible for several attacks between 1918 and 1919 that left at least 6 people dead and 6 more injured. As the name suggests, the victims were usually attacked with an axe, most often one that belonged to them, though in some cases the killer used a straight razor. The majority of the victims were Italian immigrants, leading to speculation about a possible ethnic motivation to the crimes, and even the involvement of the mob, though neither of these theories were ever proven. This was far from the only sensationalism surrounding the murders, however, as a letter purporting to be from the Axman was published in the newspapers in March of 1919, warning of crimes to come. The letter also said that anyone who had a jazz band playing in their home would be spared the axe. Just a few months later, the murders seemed to stop as abruptly as they started, and the true identity of the Axman remains a mystery to this day. The Alphabet murders were a series of child killings that took place between 1971 and 1973 in Rochester, New York. The moniker refers to both the alliterative names of the victims and the towns in which the bodies were discovered: Carmen Colon in Churchville, Wanda Walkowitz in Webster, and Michelle Maenza in the town of Macedon. But the bizarre alliterative pattern wasn't the only similarity in the cases. The girls were all of similar ages, all came from poor Catholic families, they were all abducted in the afternoon on rainy days, and they were all sexually assaulted before being strangled. These similarities made police certain that they were dealing with a single perpetrator. The murders were the subject of intense publicity and public outrage, leading police to set up a dedicated hotline for tips relevant to the case. During the course of the investigation, more than 800 potential suspects were investigated, but despite this, none of the 3 murders was ever solved. At least for now, it appears the identity of the killer may never be discovered. Between 1978 and 1992, the bodies of almost a dozen red-headed women and girls were found abandoned along major highways in several states. Due to the location of the bodies, many were found in an advanced stage of decomposition, and as a result, police were unable to identify many of the victims. It is believed that a majority were hitchhiking or involved in sex work, and were estranged from their families, which also made victim identification more difficult. The unique common feature of the red hair, as well as several other details of the killings, led investigators to believe that the string of murders were committed by a single person. In 1985, investigators almost got a break in the case, when a 37-year-old truck driver named Jerry Lee Johns attacked and attempted to strangle a woman with reddish hair. Though he was convicted of her kidnapping in 1987, he was ultimately excluded from the case. New evidence might suggest that decision was a mistake, however, as DNA from Johns was matched to one of the victims in the case in 2016. Unfortunately, the evidence came just 1 year after his death. It is still unclear whether Johns is considered the prime suspect in any of the other redhead murder cases. The Long Island serial killer is suspected to have murdered between 10 and 16 people over a 20-year period, leaving their bodies in various areas on the South Shore of Long Island, New York. The victims were mostly women involved in sex work, and the similarities between the cases led police to believe the killings were the work of one person. Bodies were first discovered in 2010, when police were searching for 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert. Gilbert was an escort who had disappeared 7 months prior, and was last seen in the Oak Beach area. While aiding in the search, a police officer and his dog came across the skeletal remains of a woman in a nearly disintegrated burlap sack. 3 more bodies were found in the next 2 days, and as the search continued, the total jumped to 10 by the spring of 2011. By the end of that year, police had discovered the remains of Shannon Gilbert, as well as several more people. Her case, as well as several others, are in a group not officially attributed to the Long Island serial killer, but that's still under investigation. Though there have been several suspects in the case, so far none have been charged. Unlike many of the cases on this list, though, there is still hope that a killer may eventually be identified. In January of 2020, investigators released the image of a belt with the letters HM or WH on them, which was found at one of the early crime scenes. Police believe the belt was handled by the killer and did not belong to any of the victims. Though it is unclear whether the latest development will yield information leading to the identity of the Long Island serial killer, at least for now, the killer is still at large. The Atlanta Ripper killed between 15 and 21 women during the years of 1911 and 1912. The killer was first referred to as the American Jack the Ripper by the press, inspired by the murders that had occurred in the late 1800s in London, as a way to sensationalize the story. The name was later shortened to the Atlanta Ripper. The victims were all black or dark-skinned women in their early 20s, described as well-dressed and attractive by reporters at the time. All were found stabbed to death with their bodies badly mutilated. The killings took place in 2 main periods. The first happened over 7 consecutive weeks, on Saturday nights between May and July of 1911. The second happened over a period of several months, claiming the lives of another 13 women. Though the investigation allegedly turned up 6 suspects, no convictions were ever made, and the crime remains unsolved. The Cleveland torso murderer was a serial killer that operated in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1930s. The torso murderer was known for dismembering victims and disposing of their remains in a poor neighborhood of the city, leading to the killer's second nickname, the Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Though there are 12 confirmed victims attributed to the serial killer, more recent research suggests that there may have been as many as 20, though it is difficult to determine due to the fact that the torso murderer mostly targeted drifters and the working poor. The methods the killer used also contributed to the difficulty in identifying victims, as all the victims were beheaded and the heads often went undiscovered. The murders also occurred at a time when forensic science was still in its infancy. Though many tried to solve the case, including famed Prohibition lawman Eliot Ness, the true identity of the Cleveland torso murderer was never found. The closest the case ever came to having a prime suspect was Dr. Francis E. Swinney, a World War I veteran who was part of a medical unit that performed amputations in the field. Though he was interviewed by Ness, there wasn't anywhere close to enough evidence to press charges, and the leads in the case soon dried up. The Chicago Strangler is thought to be responsible for the rapes and murders of more than 55 women and girls in southwestern Chicago between 2001 and 2018. The victims were between the ages of 18 and 58, and were predominantly prostitutes or women who had encounters with the justice system. As the name suggests, almost all of the victims were killed via strangulation, with most of the bodies discovered in areas near Washington Park on Chicago's South Side. Unlike some of the other cases on this list, the Chicago Strangler case is very much an ongoing investigation, and police remain divided on whether the killings are the work of a single individual. However, given the staggering number of cases, the police have said that they believe at least one unidentified serial killer is behind several of the killings, and are even open to the possibility that multiple serial killers had been active in Chicago during these years. At least for now, though, it appears that whoever is behind the killings has managed to evade the law. The Zodiac Killer is perhaps the most well-known unidentified serial killer in US history. The mythology surrounding the case is like few others, owing to decades of speculation and its numerous references in pop culture. Zodiac operated in Northern California in the late 1960s and early 70s, and is responsible for the murders of at least 5 people, though he claimed to have killed almost 40. Perhaps the best-known element of the case is the taunting letters sent to local San Francisco Bay Area press. The letters included 4 ciphers that supposedly contained the key to Zodiac's identity, only one of which was ever solved. The letters demanded that these ciphers be printed on the front page of each of the papers they were sent to, with Zodiac threatening more murders if they failed to comply. Each letter also contained an alleged count of his victims. The final confirmed letter came in 1974, after almost 3 years of silence. At the bottom it stated, "Me, 37, San Francisco PD, 0. Though there have been no shortage of suspects over the years, the true identity of the Zodiac Killer remains a mystery, as well as a continuing fascination for many amateur detectives. The case is still open in several counties of the Bay Area. That brings us to the end of our list. Are there any killers you think we forgot to include? Let us know in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest videos. Thank you for watching.